The studio of Jimmy Kimmel Live looked particularly strange that evening. The lights were a bit brighter than usual, as if someone had deliberately turned them up to the maximum. The applause sounded muted, brief, as though the audience was clapping not on cue, but because it was expected. There was a tension in the room, invisible to the eye, but it hung in the air, cutting through the noise, laughter, and camera flashes. Something was off even before Tom Cruise stepped onto the stage. And then he appeared. Not with an actor's smile, not with that sparkling ease everyone was used to. He walked confidently, but there was no showy flair in his stride, no unnecessary movements. Tom didn't look at the audience. He passed by as if the stadium-like wave of applause didn't exist at all. His face, perfectly lit by the spotlights, remained calm, even cold, as if he wasn't here for a show but to conduct an interrogation. Kimmel sat at his desk, as always in a relaxed pose, with his signature half-smile that charmed all his guests. A faint mockery glinted in his eyes, as if to say, "Come on, Tom, surprise us with something." He thought this would be a typical episode, but Cruise's gaze didn't linger on him, and in that moment, something in the room quietly clicked. Kimmel started lightly, as was his routine. A joke about Tom's eternal youth, how he must be drinking some Hollywood elixir to look the same after decades. The audience laughed, but Tom didn't respond. No smile, no quip in return. He just sat there, listening, with the expression of someone hearing something out of place at a funeral. The moment of awkwardness lasted longer than Kimmel expected. He shifted in his chair and changed the subject. "Tell us about the new movie." Project X, an action drama about a veteran returning home after decades of service, only to find his country unrecognizable. A noble, heavy topic. It could have been an opportunity for a few heartfelt words about courage, memory, or duty. Tom finally spoke. His voice was low, devoid of the usual Hollywood polish. He talked about lost generations, about people who fought not for medals, but to keep foreign voices from echoing in their city's streets. He spoke of guilt that no interview or award could wash away. The audience fell silent. The cameras tried to catch every gesture, every glance. Kimmel listened, but not to understand. He was waiting to take control again. And when Tom paused, he tried to steer the show back to its usual rhythm. With a smile, he asked if Cruise thought his new character was a cliché of toxic masculinity, a hero of an old world who can't talk about feelings and fears change. A faint ripple passed through the audience. Some tensed in their seats, others smirked, expecting a witty comeback. But Tom didn't joke. His eyes slowly rose to meet Kimmel's, and in that look, there was no irritation, no anger, only exhaustion. Exhaustion from the same questions asked over and over by the same people who seek truth, not for its own sake, but for ratings. He answered calmly that men who've been through war and betrayal don't become toxic. They're labeled that way by those who've never faced a kill or be killed choice. That if society no longer understands silent resilience, the problem lies not with people, but with society. The silence that followed was different, unfamiliar. The hollow spaces between his words filled with a tension no seasoned comedian could diffuse. Kimmel nodded, pretending to accept the response, but irritation flickered in his eyes. He switched to a supposedly neutral topic. He joked about Cruise's films where he saves the world alone. Isn't that a symbol of toxic individualism plaguing America? Why not show a hero who trusts a team instead of charging ahead solo? Tom gave a slight smile, but not a joyful one. It was sharp, almost predatory. And he answered, briefly, clearly, because the real world doesn't always give a second chance to those who wait for help. Those words hit harder than any quip. Part of the audience applauded, but without the usual cheer. These were claps of respect, or fear. Kimmel tried to stick to the plan. He went on the offensive again, asked about rumors, about difficulties on set, about Tom's tough personality, his intolerance for weakness. He tried to weave in hints, allusions to scandals. The audience perked up, sensing blood. Tom Cruise leaned forward. His gaze turned icy. He said that perhaps the problem isn't toxicity, but the fact that today weakness is elevated to a virtue and discipline is branded a crime. That maybe it's not about heroes being too harsh, but about the world being too soft. The room erupted. Some shouted, "Yes," others booed. Security in the back tensed. Camera operators scrambled to capture every frame. Kimmel realized he was losing control. His smile grew strained, and he started talking faster, interrupting Tom, joking, trying to blunt the moment's edge. But it was too late. Tom sat calmly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave his arms. His weapon was words, and each one cut sharper than any blade. The show suddenly stopped being a show, and the audience felt it. When the show returned after a commercial break, the room was steeped in an uncharacteristic silence for a new segment's start. Normally, the return was met with applause, light music, and excitement. But now, the claps were forced, brief, like an obligatory nod to the format, not a genuine response. Kimmel forced his usual smile. The cameras caught it, but in person, it looked faded. He knew. There was no easy way out anymore. Tom Cruise wasn't playing by the script. He sat across, motionless, his expression unchanged, as if he had no intention of making the show fun. He was here to endure something. Or to end something. Kimmel tried a new approach, talking about Cruise's long career, how many years he stayed at the top of Hollywood, as if trying to bring respect back into the conversation. He recalled blockbuster premieres, iconic roles. The audience stirred, some smiled. But the host's tone gradually shifted. Instead of admiration, a mocking edge crept into his voice. He brought up moments when Tom lost his temper on set, stories of outbursts, leaked videos of Cruise yelling at the crew for breaking safety protocols. Kimmel framed it as amusing anecdotes, but the undertone was different. Diminishment. "That's our hero," he said, saving the world on screen, but losing his cool over some lighting in real life. The audience laughed, but briefly, uncertainly. The kind of laugh you give when you're not sure if it's okay to laugh. Tom didn't flinch. His face remained impenetrable, but his eyes narrowed slightly. No overt emotions, just a sense of internal tension slowly building within. Kimmel seized the moment. As if smelling blood, he pressed harder. He recalled how the media once mocked Cruise's passions, his adrenaline-fueled stunts, the insane feats he always did himself, without stunt doubles. It was presented as a midlife crisis, not a testament to grit. When you don't know who you are, you jump off skyscrapers hoping to feel something. The audience giggled nervously again, but some eyes flashed with a hint of irritation. They sensed this wasn't a joke anymore. It was an attack. Cruise slowly turned his gaze to the host, not threateningly, without challenge, just intensely. And Kimmel had to pause awkwardly before continuing. He spoke about changes in cinema, about new heroes, vulnerable, open, willing to cry on screen, and said, almost jokingly, that in the age of vulnerability, people like Tom look like museum exhibits. Maybe the era of strong men in movies went out with pagers and VHS tapes, he tossed to the crowd. Silence. Someone in the audience started clapping, but the lone claps quickly faded. No one joined in. Cruise didn't respond. His silence became heavy, like a concrete slab. The atmosphere began to press physically. Even the cameras started catching audience faces, some looking away, some tensing, some clutching phones, but not daring to record. Backstage, panic erupted. Producers gestured wildly, signaling the host, "Softer. Change the topic. Steer the conversation." But Kimmel ignored them. Perhaps he sensed that backing down now would mean total defeat. And so, he went personal. He brought up Cruz's past, his failed marriages, the public's laughter at his odd interviews, the couch jumping, the silly memes. It was framed as irony, but the words carried something venomous, almost vindictive. "Sometimes, Tom," he said, "I think you're not a superhero, but just a scared guy still trying to prove to the world he's worth something." The blow landed openly. Someone in the audience gasped. Some clapped. The studio began to crack at the seams. Cruz slowly leaned forward. His hands stayed on his knees. His face was stone. But his eyes were different. They were alive with something, not anger, not rage, but something far deeper. Pain. Real pain. Kimmel caught it, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty crept into his voice. He tried to pivot to another topic, to joke as usual, but it was too late. The show was no longer a game. The entire studio felt it. The producers frantically signaled to cut to commercial. But instead, Kimmel, as if on autopilot, threw out another line. About how real strength isn't in doing stunts or going without doubles, but in admitting weaknesses. And at that moment, Tom's face showed its first movement of the night. A slight, almost imperceptible nod. But it wasn't agreement. It was a signal. A signal that the conversation had crossed a line, and that the next move wouldn't be the host's. The studio tensed. The audience froze. And the show entered a phase where scripts no longer existed. No one in the room knew what to do. Time seemed to stretch, and even those who always clapped mechanically now sat pressed into their seats. The cameras kept rolling, but their lenses caught strange shots, scenes not of joy, but of silence, of taut anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Tom Cruise sat upright, back straight, fingers clasped together. His eyes weren't on Kimmel, but somewhere beyond, as if fixed on a point past the audience. He seemed to be gathering something within, weighing whether to stay in that chair or stand and leave right then. Kimmel, sensing this, tried to reclaim the format, quickly, jokingly, safely. He asked about Tom's new project, about how tough it was to do those insane stunts without stunt doubles. But the words sounded strained, like a thread about to snap. Even his tone betrayed fear. Gone was the earlier ease. There was tension and anxiety. Cruz didn't answer right away. He turned his gaze to the host, like a man struggling to breathe, and finally said, "Everything's tough when you constantly have to prove you're not a clown." His voice was steady, not loud, but there wasn't a hint of jest in it. The studio stirred. Some clapped in support, others exchanged glances. The atmosphere shifted. The audience was no longer passive spectators. They were now accomplices. Kimmel tried to smile, said that on a show, anything goes. You can joke, you can argue, that no one wants to humiliate anyone. But his words were hollow. Everyone felt it. The show had spiraled out of control, and Cruz wasn't going to save it. He spoke about cinema, about how an actor's real job isn't to chase trends or seek likes on social media, but to tell stories that demand courage, even if you're judged for them, even if you're left standing alone. His voice grew steadier. The cameras caught a producer's face backstage, pale, talking into a headset. They knew this was something that couldn't be edited out, re-recorded, or hidden behind cuts. Kimmel still held on, tried to switch topics. He interrupted Cruz, asking if he was tired of being the eternal superhero. Maybe it was time to play someone weak, vulnerable. After all, today's audiences value not perfect characters, but real people, with fears, mistakes, broken dreams. He said it softly, but the words hit a jab, a hint that Cruz clings too tightly to his image, afraid to show weakness. Tom sat up straighter. His face remained calm, but his eyes were cold. He said, "I'm not afraid of being weak. I just know the cost of those who demand weakness from others, to feel stronger themselves. The noise in the studio thickened. Reactions varied. Some shouted, "Yes," others, "Get out." But the main thing was, people stopped seeing this as an interview. It was now a fight, with no chance of a truce. Kimmel made one last attempt. He brought up loud scandals around the actor, hinted that fame comes at a price, and that sometimes it's better to tone it down to avoid destroying what's been built. And then, for the first time that evening, Cruise smirked. Not joyfully, wearily. He replied, "Destroy what? An illusion? A caricature? I never built an image for people who see life through memes." His voice rang as if every person in the room had been stripped bare. No malice, just raw truth. Kimmel froze. He realized he was losing, that no matter what he said now, it would sound either pathetic or petty. But the host's reflexes were stronger. He tried to turn it into a joke. Said all this was just emotions, and real heroes cry. Even Batman cried once. And then the room heard Tom Cruise say quietly, almost in a whisper, "Real heroes cry where no one can see." And that sentence held everything: pain, loneliness, and contempt for empty theatrics. Kimmel fell silent. For several long seconds, only the cameras, holding their breath, kept filming. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A producer backstage clenched his fists. The studio's atmosphere felt like a room about to explode. Kimmel, through sheer force, made himself speak. He smiled falsely and suggested applauding Tom for his honesty. The applause began, hesitantly, like raindrops. Then it grew. But even in that noise, there was something strange. People weren't entirely sure who or what they were clapping for. Cruise didn't stand. He didn't thank them. He just sat, like the last man in the room who no longer plays games. Kimmel announced another commercial break. The cameras cut to black, but everyone knew. This break wouldn't change anything. The tension was rising, and the next round promised to be a real battle. When the studio lights flared back on, the audience didn't greet it with applause, but with silence. Not the awkward silence of a failed joke. A heavy, dense silence, like before a verdict. Kimmel returned to the desk. His smile was still there, honed by years, but his eyes betrayed something else: exhaustion, frustration, confusion. He knew the show was lost. It no longer belonged to him. All that remained was to try to save face before millions. He spoke cautiously, as if on thin ice. Thanked Tom for his candor. Talked about how hard it is to carry the weight of fame. How tough it is to be a symbol for a generation. That the audience was here to support him. His voice was soft, soothing, but the words crumbled mid-air, finding no response. A giant screen behind him lit up with a prepared slide. Clips of Cruise as a hero to millions. Stunts from Mission Impossible. Fiery dialogues from Jerry Maguire. The gleaming sunglasses and triumphant gesture in Top Gun. Upbeat, triumphant music played in the background, as if reminding everyone who he was and who he should remain. But Tom didn't even glance at it. He sat like stone. Not a muscle twitched on his face. He didn't let those images erase what had already been said. Kimmel faltered. The music stopped. The screen went dark. And in that moment, he realized there'd be no easy way out. No montage of triumphant moments, no pre-prepared nostalgia would save the night. He changed tactics, went on the offensive. "Tom," he began, keeping a lightness in his voice that now sounded false. "You've played so many legendary roles. But be honest, when the camera turns off, who's left?" The audience held its breath. Have you ever thought that without the superhero image, you might have nothing to show? The words landed too sharply, too personally. Tom Cruise slowly turned his head toward the host, not abruptly, not threateningly, as if turning heavy armor, not a face, and he looked at him intently. "Do you really want to hear this?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusatory. There was no anger, no aggression, just exhaustion, the kind that comes to a man who's seen too much. Kimmel, already sensing he'd gone too far, nodded anyway. A spark flickered in his eyes. He hoped this would give him a chance to reclaim the spotlight. Tom began to speak, slowly, with long pauses as if each word had to be dragged from deep within. When the cameras turn off, a person remains. A person who's seen excitement turn to indifference, who knows the price of applause and how easily it's bought with the right phrase. A person who's learned, in this world they'll smile to your face and sell you for a like. A person who looks in the mirror every morning not for fame, but to check if he's still himself. A rustle swept through the audience. Someone whispered something in the balcony, as if the entire studio suddenly remembered there was something here bigger than a show. Kimmel tried to toss a joke, a light remark about simple joys, morning coffee, family breakfasts, but Cruz didn't blink. "Simple joys?" he echoed, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "A simple joy is when I can look in the mirror in the morning and not see a coward." Absolute silence settled over the studio. Kimmel tried not to show how tense he was. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Maybe, Tom, it's all just fear? Fear of being ordinary? Fear of disappearing?" Those words sliced through the air like a knife through fabric. Tom didn't shout, didn't flare up. He simply stood, slowly, calmly, like a man who realized there was nothing more to say here. The entire room froze. The producers froze in the control room, the security by the stage, the audience in their seats. The camera operators froze, unsure whether to follow him or leave the scene alone. Cruz stood to his full height. His gaze swept the rows. He wasn't seeking support. He wasn't issuing a challenge. He just looked, and then, staring straight at Kimmel, he said, "You want to see fear? Look in the mirror, because only a coward turns someone else's pain into entertainment." He turned and walked toward the exit. No theatrics, no drama. He just left. Someone in the front row stood and started clapping, hesitantly, uncertainly. A few others followed. Some stayed seated, as if gripping their chairs. Kimmel opened his mouth, wanted to shout something, a joke, a lifeline back to the familiar broadcast, but nothing came out. Tom disappeared backstage, and the room was left with emptiness. The noise didn't rise right away. It came in waves, whistles, applause, shouts. Some recorded on their phones, some tried to shout over others, but it was all somewhere in the background. At the center of the stage sat Kimmel, alone, without his saving smile, without his usual jokes. He knew. Tonight, he lost. And not just the episode. Not just the ratings. He lost to a man. When the studio lights dimmed again, it felt like something else went out with them. Not just a show. Trust. The atmosphere was like a shattered storefront, glittering shards everywhere, and no one dared step forward for fear of getting cut. Tom Cruise left. Silently, without scenes, without shouting. He simply stood and walked away, leaving a heavy mark behind. No assistants chased after him. No security held him back. He was escorted only by stares, some full of respect, others of bewilderment. On Jimmy Kimmel's face, two emotions froze at once, relief and devastation. He knew. This wasn't just a failure. This was a moment that would go down in history. Everything seemed to slow down. Someone in the audience tried to clap, uncertainly, out of habit, but the sound quickly faded, dissolving into a dull silence. A few people in the front rows recorded the moment on their phones, and that's when the real storm began. Everything that happened in the studio in those few minutes spread across the internet like wildfire in a dry forest. YouTube filled with clips titled things like "Tom Cruise walks off show live," "End of an era, Cruise draws the line, Kimmel loses," in front of the whole country. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like "Jew Tom walkout," "Sure Kimmel collapse," and "Truth over format" shot to the top. People argued in the comments with a passion not seen in ages. Tom Cruise did what everyone invited there for a show, not a conversation, should have done. If you respect yourself, you don't tolerate humiliation for airtime. It's time to change the format. People are tired of fakeness. Meanwhile, the other half of the audience accused Cruise of cracking, showing weakness, failing to handle the pressure. A show is a show. You have to play by its rules. If you walk away, you lose. That's the law of television. But behind the usual phrases lay something bigger. For the first time in a long while, people felt they were watching not a script, not a performance, but a real fight. Backstage was chaos. Producers frantically discussed damage control, cut the scandal from the recording, keep the moment in the broadcast, issue an official statement. Over the intercom, orders flew. Don't comment to the press. Prepare a press release about an unforeseen incident. Keep your faces calm. But it didn't matter anymore. The information had broken free, becoming an unstoppable avalanche. Major media outlets raced to publish their takes. The hero walked out, and no one could stop him. A talk show that lost its soul live on air. Tom Cruise reminded us that dignity isn't a cliché. Tom himself stayed silent. Not a single comment. Not a single post. No attempt to justify himself. And in that silence was a strength no headline could drown out. Forums buzzed with heated debates. The one who walks away first wins first. Strength isn't in speaking beautifully. Strength is in not letting yourself be used. Cruise's fans recalled his roles in action films, dramas, cult classics. They saw a connection between the actor and his actions. The man who always fought for his truth on screen had finally done it in real life. Meanwhile, Kimmel's show was crumbling. Ratings plummeted. New episodes drew fewer viewers. Comments piled up. After that night, it's impossible to watch anymore. Everything feels empty now, like the jokes don't save it. Advertisers started asking questions. The network's executives demanded a script overhaul, and competitors rejoiced. In the battle for audiences, a window had opened. Tom Cruise never appeared on a talk show again, but his walkout became such a defining moment that it was later featured in compilations of television's most honest moments. Certain frames became iconic. His slow walk across the stage, shoulders not bent an inch, a gaze fixed on the distance, as if he carried not just himself, but the memory of a time when honor mattered more than applause. A flash mob began on social media. People posted short videos of themselves standing up and walking away from various places, symbolically echoing Cruise's gesture. The movement was dubbed the walkout. Young people, who once saw Tom as an old-school actor, now wrote, "He showed you can still keep your dignity in this day and age." Real masculinity isn't in shouting. It's in silence at the right moment. While some made memes, others debated how television would change. There were arguments. Should talk shows rethink how they treat guests? Should they show more respect to those who come not for jokes, but for conversation? Tom Cruise didn't respond. He just kept working on his projects, kept living as he always had, back straight, no cheap sensationalism, no excuses. And in doing so, he kept winning again and again. If you're watching this moment on YouTube, drop a comment below. Whose side are you on? Tom Cruise, who chose truth and dignity, or Jimmy Kimmel, who tried to hold on to the usual format at any cost? What matters more to you? Truth, even if it breaks the rules, or order, even if it's hollow? your turn to speak.